Okay, thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everybody, for taking time out today from the new normal to join us. As Sarah said, I'm going to talk about the teleworking threat landscape. And so if we can move to the next slide, please. As Rick mentioned when he did the introductions, my job and the job of my team at BPM is to think like thieves. And when one thinks like a thief, the new telework, work from home environment to a thief represents an increase in the surface area that we have to attack. And so some examples are shown on the slide here. First and foremost, all these computers and mobile devices, whether they're company issued or owned by the employees, are suddenly attackable outside the company firewall. So these systems were largely constrained behind a firewall that limited our ability to get to them. Now we find them strung out across home offices all over, and to an attacker, that is a tremendous increase in attack surface area. Along with that, things like VPN systems and remote email services, cloud services and applications, all of these are seeing a tremendous increase in utilization, which allows thieves or attackers to fly below the radar better, to avoid detection better. And this is a tremendous benefit to those threat actors or fraudsters out there trying to perform attacks. Additionally, there are all kinds of new social engineering type attacks or attacks against humans themselves that present to an attacker that weren't readily available to us in the past. So things like calling employees at home and maybe impersonating IT and telling that employee you're there to help them maybe secure or enhance the performance of their remote access, and then talk them through some technical steps that may expose their computer or expose credentials or other sensitive information that they can take advantage of. There's also all kinds of attacks taking advantage of the coronavirus responses, such as many of us have seen attacks where we get an offer to view a map that shows information for our area or our neighborhood or something. Next slide, please. Additionally, when we think about these systems at home, there's all kinds of attack surface presented to us by home networks. So not only has everybody brought home computers and mobile devices to work from home, but now they're working from home on ISP-provided routers or modems that are often really poorly secured. So they may have default passwords, lack adequate patching or updating. And if an attacker commandeers one of these systems, now they have a man in the middle position from which they can monitor and intercept all of the traffic moving between that employee and the office or the cloud or wherever they're going. Home networks, whether they're wired or wireless, are often really poorly secured. We'll talk about securing home wireless in a moment. Home PCs are often already compromised, at least with adware and in some cases with much more malicious malware prior to even beginning the whole work from home. And then, of course, homes these days have a lot of what we call IoT or Internet of Things devices that may connect to the internet, from thermostat and your heating and ventilation and air conditioning system to garage door openers, home alarm systems, smart TVs. All of these represent an increase in attack surface area to attackers. So on to the next slide, just a couple quick examples here. Here we see a very common phishing attack using current events. Many of us have received emails like this in our inboxes already. And this one purports to be from state.gov, which is actually a valid domain for the State Department. But of course, if one clicks reply on this email, one finds out that it's not going back to state.gov at all. It's going back to some crazy domain that nobody's ever heard heard of before. And it's got this wonderful little attachment here, but if one looks at the extension on that file, it's an ISO extension, which is an executable file format type that allows the computer to view the file contents as if they were on a CD drive, in a great way, a very common way that attackers use to circumvent security controls on workstations. Next slide, please. As we move on here, just a couple of very basic text-based attacks using current events. There on the left, we see someone offering to help with the stimulus funds that are coming out for organizations. All you got to do is click on that link, and you'll either be asked for some PII, or that will send you to a site that will attack your mobile device. There are a lot of attacks out there targeting both Android and Apple phone users. On the right there, of course, we see another great example that purports to be from an authority that says you've come in contact with someone who has been tested as positive. So please take appropriate action. And of course, in this case, the appropriate action involves getting your phone attacked in one form or another. On to the next slide, please. And then as we talk about remote work from home environments, a lot of organizations, hopefully a lot of you present today, have implemented MFA or 2FA, multi-factor authentication. And that, of course, is when we take something like a fob here or a mobile device, and we send a one-time code to it to augment our username and password. And multi-factor authentication is a tremendously powerful control. In the case of attackers, they have developed a number of ways around it. So some of those attacks we just saw in the previous slides are used to deploy payloads, malicious payloads like we see in the first bullet here with lovely names like Necro Browser that are meant to intercept critical communications information from your phone or your home PC. There are a lot of attacks against help desks, both your company's help desk and your vendor's help desk, such as your phone provider's help desk. And you see the little photograph there on the right from a little attack that we attempted against a phone provider help desk, wherein we tried to convince the phone provider to switch the phone number for that account. So then, when that one-time passcode gets sent to the user's phone, it gets sent to our phone instead of the user's phone. When setting up remote access, there's all kinds of back doors that may not require multi-factor authentications, things that go under the name of Exchange Web Services or Exchange native clients with modern encryption that can be used as an end around on your multi-factor authentication. And then, of course, there's always just asking users for that one-time code. There's a very popular attack going around right now where an attacker tries to log into the user's, say, online banking system or remote access VPN controller, and they know the username and password through some other attack. They enter that, and now they're presented with multi-factor authentication. Okay, well, not to be denied, they're going to pick up the phone then, call that user and say, hey, we're from the bank and there's been some suspicious activity in your account. We need to go over this with you, but before we do, we need you to verify that it's really you. So would you please provide the one-time code you just received? And of course, that one-time code you just received is not for you to validate the caller who you are. It's for you to divulge your one-time code to that caller so they can finish the login process and then take advantage of whatever they're trying to defeat. And then lastly, there's SIM card swaps, attempts to actually impersonate or replace the phone you have with other phones. So those are some of the common attack techniques. Now we'll just wrap up here with some of the Telework security considerations that all users and organizations should keep in mind from a hacker's viewpoint. We're going to start with user considerations. First and foremost, just to follow up what Sarah was discussing, you should, if your company has a work from home policy or procedure in place, you should know it, understand it, and follow it. Other key items: use your privacy screens when you don't need them. There are a lot of attacks out there that turn on cameras without the little light that indicates that it's actually on, and then they can spy on you. Make sure your digital assistants like Siri or Alexa are not in earshot when you're having sensitive conversations. Texas and Lexus sound a lot like Alexa, and you will invoke their listening protocols. Practice safe application storefront protocols. When you need to go to download an application, be reminded that you're no longer safe behind the corporate firewall that's going to watch and look for those malicious payloads. So only go to the Apple Store, only go to Google Play, places that have vetted the contents of their applications, and just simply don't download anything that you don't need to at this time. Pay very close to links attention to links before you click on them. Chase.com is not the same destination as chase.bank.com, and chase.com is not the same destination as chase.net. Pay very close attention to the links you're clicking on. The last 3 letters, or occasionally 4 letters, that .net, that .com, that .org, and the word that immediately precedes those last 3 letters, those are where you're going. Anything that comes before that is irrelevant for our purposes. Pay attention to the .org or the .com or the .net and the word that immediately precedes it. And if that's not where you think you should be going, then you're going to the wrong place. And again, as we saw in the phishing email example, if you get an email that purports to be from a fellow employee or some vendor or other authority source, and you're not sure about it, just click reply. You don't have to reply. Just click the reply button and see where it says it's going to. If that email is not headed back to the same place it purported to be from, then someone is attacking you. Next slide, please. Continued user security considerations. I can't overemphasize this. Now is the time to use the strongest possible passwords. And so use strong, in other words, long passwords. The only strong password is a long one. We recommend examples like passphrases. But avoid easy-to-guess slogans, lyrics, etc. Attackers like us have started to incorporate advertising slogans and the Lord's Prayer and McCartney-Lennon lyrics and so forth into our dictionaries for password guessing. Make sure your home Wi-Fi is using secure encryption, not old-fashioned WEP or WPA1. Make sure it's WPA2 or, better yet, WPA3 encryption levels. You can check those settings on your home Wi-Fi. Consider segmenting your network. That may be a bit much to take on at this time, but paranoid people like I have more than one network at home, and one network has non-secure stuff and the other has secure stuff. And then lastly, think about least functionality. Turn off your location services if they're not needed, especially if you're staycations at home, you're not going anywhere, you don't need those location services. Turn off Bluetooth. Turn off Wi-Fi unless you need it. And consider a personal hotspot. If you do have to travel, avoid using public Wi-Fi. Next slide, please. And then just a couple of telework security considerations for the organization itself. Now is a good time to consider mobile device management solution for managing all those mobile devices. Make sure everything has good logging controls, and this is something Sarah's team can help with if you don't already have this in place. Someone to monitor who's logging in. Make sure you have adequate storage for those logs, because now is when an attacker can fly below the radar because there's so much activity on those devices. Again, multi-factor authentication for everything. Patch everything, and at the organizational level, think about least functionality as well when it comes to which employees need access to what. when everybody is safely ensconced behind the firewall, that's not as important a consideration as it is now when someone, an attacker could have commandeered one of those remote employees' logins and now all of a sudden has access to everything. So what exactly does that employee with that job role need access to? Not an easy solution to this problem, but a very important consideration during these mobile work from home times. And the last slide, for those of you, last slide in my section, for those of you who are faced with concerns, Rick, if we can move on to the next slide. For those of you faced with concerns about what your attack surface area looks like right now in the telework world, we have put together a very concise, inexpensive telework remote access security assessment service where you can come in and look at your technical footprint, take a deep dive into your remote access systems and policies. So that's all I had for this morning. Any questions, Rick, before we move on?
We don't have any questions for our audience at this point, but if I wanted to ask you a question, you brought up the issue of public Wi-Fi. Can I just ask you, is it ever okay to connect to a public Wi-Fi, including my own ISP public Wi-Fi, such as in the Greater Bay Area, we have Xfinity, so such as Xfinity Wi-Fi?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is sometimes it's necessary to use public Wi-Fi. If it's all you have available, then that is what you need to do. There are some compensating controls. Make sure you have a VPN solution before getting on the public Wi-Fi so that all of your transmissions can be encrypted. As we noted in the previous slide, if you can, use a personal hotspot that will leverage your connection to the cell system, and that's a good way to try to avoid it. But the answer is you probably shouldn't if you can avoid it.